Hi, I'm Derri, and I've read it before. Last time I promised you a video on Thud, the second to last book in the City Watch series. I'm going to break that promise, because I can, and instead I'm going to talk about the sub-series and how they differ and why you kind of need to know what those differences are before you pick which one you're going to read. The first couple of books, The Colour of Magic, The Light Fantastic, centre around Rincewind, one of the wizards. And he officially is the start of the Wizards sub-series. The trick with the sub-series of Wizards is that all of the other wizards show up in all of the other books before they become a critical part of the Wizards books. We instead follow Rincewind. So if you don't like Rincewind and he's a bit divisive in the fandom, I'm not a fan. Other people love him, and fair enough, they're totally allowed to, but not everyone is. It takes a long time to expand the cast around Rincewind. He's very much used as a centrepiece that brings in other characters, and you do meet some really cool characters, not least of which is Cohen the Barbarian, who ends up getting his own little couple of stories, and the luggage. All the luggage is fabulous. The luggage I do like. The luggage is made of sentient pearwood, has hundreds of little feet, and depending on how the luggage feels depends on what you'll find when you open it. The luggage is fabulous. It is homicidal and people do vanish in its vicinity. However, the wizard books, because it takes so long for the entirety of the Unseen University faculty to join the wizards books, it can feel quite odd when you do get them, because it very much just runs on from where you are at that point in the Discworld books, where if you've read other Discworld books, you've encountered them in other people's stories. So, and the wizards as a theme tend to be looking at this, I want to say science, but it's not science. They're the observers of the way things operate on the disc. So the wizards often bring some really quite fabulous insights into what's going on, and they're just this delightfully batty group of old blokes who, at the same time as resisting any kind of change, are often at the forefront of any kind of change. So the wizards is very much about, do you like these characters? Their individual plots among their stories are very varied. There's very little sort of stringing them together. They're literally just stuff that happens in and around the university, or around Rincewind. And as I say, he's not universally loved. But that's the wizards. They're very pre-science, but that kind of feel. The Wizards, book 3, is Equal Rights. So the Witches would be the next subset I will talk about. The Witches, they're one of my favourite subsets. Because they're primarily set outside of the big city, the first half of the Witches books are set in the mountains outside of, around the kingdom of Lancre, and the second half of the series, when we move into the Tiffany stories, takes place on the downs. So it's very countryside, it's very rural. The Witches stories have a fairy tale theme, kind of. They're very storytelling. There's a lot of folk tale, a lot of myth, a lot of legend you encounter from our own world. So you've got the Long Man, the Green Man, the Horned Man, Pan, that sort of entity in the Witches' Tales. You get elves in the Witches' Tales, standing stones, those kind of, haunted castles, wicked witches, orphan girls, princes. Very fairy tale feel to the Witches' stories. When it comes down to Tiffany, again, it's about acceptance, and when you're different, how to interact with the people around you, and what being different, whether that's smarter or more powerful, what responsibilities that gives you. And of course, the witches are the key part of the Witches series. And unlike the wizards, the witches pretty much has somebody for everyone. You've got Granny Weatherwax, who I adore and want to grow up to be just like, even though I think I probably have grown up to be just like her. Maybe I shouldn't do that. I don't know. And then there's Nanny, who I've certainly grown up to look like. And I actually wouldn't mind growing up to be a bit like Nanny. She's very cool. So you've got very stern and very, I'm going to do what's best for everybody and I don't care what they think about it. And you've got Nanny, who likes a drink and smokes a pipe and will sing at the drop of a hat and has red boots. She's rather glorious. And Magrat, we meet with the witches, and she actually goes through a lot of stuff through the witches books. But she's sort of the airy fairy hippie kind of witch, where, you know, there's silver jewellery and symbols. But that's the witches. They're very traditional sort of stories. After the witches, probably the next subset would be the Death series, which I obviously have talked about. But in terms of what to get from the subset, Death is probably the most philosophical of the subsets. These are the ones that address some really quite fundamental and profound questions around life and existence. And yes, they're funny, and yes, they have some, you know, remarkably iconic moments and lines and characters, but they are quite profound. And as I said in my Death videos, Death's not in them a huge amount, and I do think that's because of the amount of philosophy he brings to the books. They would be quite a difficult read, I think, if Death spent too much time on page, because he does ponder those very big questions around existence and around life. So we've got the wizards, the witches, Death, the Watch, who I'm in the middle of talking about, where Death is very philosophical. The City Watch books are very much a social commentary on our world. The themes are very much about the things we encounter in our world. It's bigotry and jingoism and capitalism and status and stature, and how that impacts relationships and dealing with other people. And the bigotry gets touched on in very blatant ways, and it gets touched on in very subtle ways. And they're about as political as Sir Terry ever gets. There are some very strong, clearly Sir Terry had some very strong thoughts about what should and shouldn't be happening in society, and the City Watch is where he voices those thoughts about good, bad, right, wrong. Are they the same? Because mostly they're not. And yeah, so that's the City Watch books. And those are the main long series. There's a couple of other little ones. You've got what they call the Industrial Revolution series, the Ancient Civilization series. They're really the standalones. Small Gods is rather a wonderful look at organised religion and belief and the power that has over people, and explains a lot about the nature of gods on the disc. Pyramids I think is where Sir Terry was leaning into science a lot, and metaphysics and quantum, and Pyramids as a result is an odd read. It messes a lot with time and dimensions and mathematics and reality and Yeah, it's an odd one. Pyramids. It's an outlier all on its own. It's not a bad book. It is confusing. You just kind of have to let it flow. The Industrial Revolution books, for the most part, are the Moist von Lipwig stories and The Truth. The Truth is very much freedom of the press and how reality gets reported and how it can be skewed, and the rise of tabloids and advertising and the things you find in newspapers and how newspapers get written and how they grab your attention and the doggedness of this newly burgeoning job opportunity of journalism and what that is. What does it mean? What is your job as a journalist? I did enjoy The Truth. The Truth is very much worth reading for a feel of the city that doesn't really have a lot to do with the watch and has only small interference from the patrician. It's much more about just the day-to-day lives of people in the city. And the Moist von Lipwig books are probably the last little arc I will talk about. Moist comes into the disc quite late, and we meet him just after he's been hanged, which I know sounds ridiculous, but he's not dead, and he is literally being given an angel. Ultimately, it's work for me or you really will be hanged. And work for me is the patrician, and he wants this hanged con artist, white-collar criminal, to run the post office. So Going Postal is the first of those three books. So you've got Going Postal, Making Money, Raising Steam, where we look at the birth and growth of the post office, the birth and growth of modern banking, and the birth and growth of the steam engine. And in all of these, Moist's skills as a conman and his rather unique take on what people want, they're very refreshing, and I think are going to be a really easy slide into Discworld for people who perhaps struggle with the more absurd level of the Pratchett-isms, in that they are part of the Moist books, but they are secondary to the quick wit, glib kind of, what do they call it? The walk and talk that Adam Sorkin created with The West Wing. It's very talky, and much like Rincewind, if you don't like Moist, you're not going to like these books because they are so very centered around Moist. I do like Moist. I think he's just hilarious. The people who are around him are hilarious. The way it makes you look at institutionalized corporations, or, well, not corporations because they're not incorporated, in these foundational entities in a society. Your post office, how do you communicate with people that you can't get to yourself? The bank, how do you operate your finances? These are important things for a city to grow, and obviously the patrician realizes that, and he's put Moist in the position to make it work. It's I think a great look for anybody to get even just a really basic understanding of economics in making money. Moist is very clear about the fact that when you panic and you save your money and you don't spend it, well, everybody kind of goes belly up. If you are doing a post office, then you need bulk, not small specialities. You need everyone to be able to send a letter cheaply rather than one or two people to send a parcel quite expensively for that to work. And the Industrial Revolution books do talk about the fact that making a profit shouldn't be the goal, because the profit doesn't come monetarily from that entity. It comes from the ability it spreads through the city for other people to be able to operate more efficiently or more whatever. The profit comes to the city rather than the entity that you're running. Anyway, So that's the Industrial Revolution books with Moist. And that, I'm pretty sure, covers everything in those books. The other subset I will talk about, and it doesn't get talked about a lot, and it should, is the Science of Discworld books. Oh, I came to these quite late, and I have read them a number of times since I found them. Well, not found them. Since I thought they might, I'll read one because, how bad could it be? It's Pratchett. It's probably worth reading. They are so worth reading. They are not, like you often find with science fiction and fantasy, they're not a book describing how that world works scientifically. What it is a look at our world from their perspective. So you get one chapter from the point of view of the wizards, because they are the observers on the disc, and they create Round World. We live on a shelf in Discworld. They create Round World, and they're observing Round World, and there's no magic on Round World, and they're quite bewildered by this, because how does it work? How does it operate? And you'll get a chapter about the wizards observing, and then you get a chapter of science, and you get a chapter describing what the wizards are seeing. So very early on, the wizards are seeing balls just rotating in space, and the science begins to tell you about the movement of planets and how they interact with each other, and how one thing will affect something else, and how all of the orbits of everything are drawn to the central attractor, being the sun. And then we jump back to the wizards, who are like, oh, okay, we learned a thing, right, so the next thing they then observe will be plants, or evolution at its beginning, or a specific type of animal, and it will jump to the science again, and you get the next bit of explanation. And I found them incredibly clever, not least because you actually get a Discworld story in there, but because it made a lot of quite profound science very accessible to me as a layperson. I'm not a scientist, I'm a high school dropout, and I learnt things about, I learnt a lot. Feel free to read The Science of Discworld and join me in increasing the knowledge in your brain. So I can highly recommend those, they're well worth picking up. Other than that, there are a handful of novellas, short stories. I will recommend very, very highly the Trollbridge short story, which is, it's tiny, it's itty bitty, you can probably just find it on the internet. And the fan-funded film, The Trollbridge, based on it. It's 10 minutes long, and of all of the screen adaptations that exist out there, that is the one that has exactly the right feel. That's the one that is Discworld to perfection. I will link that in the description. So with that, that's my ramble and my impromptu topic for the week. And I will catch you next time. Until then, I would love it if you liked, if you subscribed, and with that, I'm going to love you and leave you, and I'll catch you next time.